Welcome to the Flan Foundation for Mental Health. I'm your mental hygienist, Morgan Rector, and today our guest is Canadian radio legend Erin Davis, and she's experienced every parent's worst nightmare. She lost her daughter, Lauren, suddenly due to medical complications. There was no time to prepare herself emotionally for the experience and no opportunity to say goodbye. There are few hardships that compare to losing a child, if any, and Erin knows this all too well. It was a difficult journey that brought her to this point. She documented that journey in a memoir entitled Mourning Has Broken, Love, Loss, and Reclaiming Joy, due to be published on February 26, 2019 by HarperCollins. Thank you so much for joining us today, Erin.
Thank you, Morgan, and for that beautiful introduction. You've summed up our situation beautifully, and I would only add to that she was our only child too. So it is, as you say, a parent's worst nightmare, and all we can do is try and make the best out of this waking life that we have left.
It can't be an easy thing to share this experience.
You're absolutely right. And people who have asked me about the book, and I have to say, too, this is my very first interview about the book, so yay to both of us. The people who have asked me, who know me, say it must have been cathartic to write it, but quite the opposite. It was much like climbing into the metaphorical grave with her once again, and reliving everything and things that my husband and I hadn't even discussed, because he took the phone call notifying us of her passing. And so I hadn't really even said, okay, what happened during that phone call? And can you tell me how I reacted? Because I have absolutely no recollection. So yes, in short, it was extremely difficult to write.
Oh, without a doubt. I'm going to start off with that story, going way back to your experience just of being Lauren's mother. So describe to me how you felt the first time you held her in your arms right after you gave birth to her.
Well, it was, I think I was incredulous. Obviously, you have those maternal feelings and the feeling of wonder and joy that I think sink in. But for me, it was like, what just happened? And because it's such a traumatic experience, but bless her, she was 3 weeks early. She was 6 pounds, 12 ounces. I only had about 3 hours of good labor, and there she was. So, it was, I guess, kind of just shock. And then looking at her hands and seeing these tremendously long fingers. And that's what the nurses mentioned too, was just, that she had these piano fingers, which indeed he would go on to use and play the piano.
And a lot of people who have had children say that having them change their life and change them as a person. What made you different as a human being after her birth?
Oh, I would love to say that I became a completely different person, but I was just, that is a good question, because my focus was so much on my balancing my career, which was just starting to really ramp up and hit a high note, and also motherhood, that immediately it became, okay, how are we going to make this work and do it so that I didn't have to go on maternity leave and do the show from home, which we did 1 week after she was born, and I would have done it the day after, except that they didn't have the technology set up in my house yet. So really what it became was just trying to become this new human being who was not just a broadcaster and a morning show personality and whatever else I was, but also a mother. And in that regard, I had the most incredible support and help in my husband, Rob, who just dove right in. And as soon as she would start crying in my arms or or needed feeding, he'd either take care of her or make it possible that I could still be on the air from my little office at home and be a mom at the same time. So it became a juggling act, I guess, is what the answer would be.
Yeah, it is difficult to have it all when you're both a mother and a career person at the same time, isn't it?
Definitely, and that started my journey toward antidepressants. Since we're talking about mental health, because it wasn't far along into my experience as motherhood that I just found like I'm not handling this well. I just felt like so much frustration because I didn't feel like I was fulfilling everything that I needed to do and to be. So that's when my depression sank in, and I had some cruel comments made about me by other broadcasters on other stations about my weight that I hadn't taken off, and all those fun things that happen to a woman, especially in the 90s. And so I took it hard, and that's when I started seeking help on a couch and through prescriptions.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about postpartum depression, but like I always heard about how it's a chemical thing, but I was always curious about the pathology of it. So basically, I mean, one thing I've heard ultimately is that you could read 1 million books on parenting, but nothing prepares you for the real thing. And it's unfortunate that those other personalities wouldn't understand. Were these people not mothers, or were they men?
Yeah, the latter. And, fixated on a female who had gotten a high-profile position, and we were killing it in the ratings with my partner, Don Daynard, and I, and there were TV commercials. And face it, I mean, I wasn't gorgeous by any means, and I still hold to that these days, but I guess I just kind of stirred up some animosity, and it was about them, of course, much more than it was about me. But I took it personally because, when it's directed at you, you tend to take it personally.
Sure,
so
yeah.
I don't think that I experienced postpartum depression per se. This was part of the depression and that gene that runs in my family and I've recognized now for generations, that was just kind of manifesting itself with all of the challenges that I was taking on.
Absolutely. And I was curious to get a snapshot of what your daughter was like. I watched the video on YouTube where she appeared on CHFI to announce that she was pregnant. But, it only gave the tip of the iceberg in terms of what she was like as a human being. So I was wondering, could you describe her personality? What kind of person was Lauren?
Oh, you would have to, I don't know. It sounds so biased. It sounds like a mother saying she was amazing. But Morgan, she truly was. She was verbal at a very young age. She was singing the American and Canadian anthems at the age of 2 years old, and I have the video to back it up, because she would be mimicking me practicing the anthems to sing at Blue Jays games. And before we knew it, she was singing too. So eventually we got to sing them together Mother's Days at the Jays games. She was smart. She was sensitive. She was very, very funny, always making up voices and doing the things that a lot of only children, or as we call it, limited editions, probably do to help amuse themselves. She was loving. She was sarcastic. She had a lot of the best traits of both her father and me. And she was impatient in terms of her career and leapt into a very successful radio career very young. And she was extremely musical. She played a lot of instruments, and she sang beautifully. So that's kind of Lauren in a nutshell. I hope I haven't left anything off there, but yeah, she's pretty much anything you would want your child to be. She really, truly was.
And what condition was she in health-wise leading up to her final days? Were you aware of any kind of illness on her part?
No, not at all. She was in good health. She had pretty much sailed through her pregnancy. She was very careful. She had dropped everything from her beloved sushi to artificial sweeteners to caffeine to everything in order to be the healthiest pregnant mom she could be. she had a bit of a complicated birth, because as soon as she went into labor, the baby's heart was in trouble, or the heart rate was elevated, and or I guess it dropped. Anyway, it turned out that they had to go in for a C-section right away because the umbilical cord was around his neck, and so it was a very fast emergency C-section, and she gave birth. And in the 7 months that she had with us after she gave birth to Colin in October of 2014, she was disappointed that she wasn't able to breastfeed well. And as it turns out, she does not come from a long line of great milk producers, as I wasn't, and my mom wasn't, and her mom wasn't, and stuff you find out after the fact, Morgan, honestly. And so she was not happy about that. And that was the only time that she said she might even be depressed, is that her baby's weight was in a very low percentile, and she was insisting on breastfeeding because there is such a very strong and vocal lobby for breastfeeding only. And in that way, she was feeling stress and pressure. But other than that, there was absolutely no sign of anything going wrong in her health or metabolism or anything, because she would have shared that with us.
And speaking of breastfeeding, I noticed in your Twitter feed you retweeted an article about a medication called domperidone. And could you please explain how that drug could be relevant to your daughter's story?
We would love to, if we could only make that firm connection, but her coroner just went through everything he could with a fine-tooth comb. He examined tissue and suspected very strongly that it was a drug interaction that caused her heart to stop. She may well have had something called long QT syndrome. And that's kind of like you hear about it when a healthy teenage basketball player drops dead on the court. It's a long space between heartbeats. And what this drug is suspected of being able to do is to be able to jump in between the heartbeats and stop them. And so we are not able to say with full certainty that it was domperidone. However, that is our own personal suspicion, and it is one that we have the support of anecdotal evidence or anecdotal opinions from coroners, but nothing that they are able to nail down 100%. I've retweeted that article from Today's Parent because they tell you, please get your heart checked before you go on this drug, because if you have heart problems, there is a risk of interaction.
Sure. And with her passing happening so suddenly, how did you cope with the shock of it just happening with no inkling whatsoever that it could happen?
I think that shock is exactly the word to use, and it was a blessing, because when you have that cloak of shock that this cannot possibly be happening, you go into another mode. There's another kind of an engine that switches on when the other one falters, and it was through that we were able to plan a memorial for her friends in Ottawa, where she was living and working, and one in Toronto for, our friends and her friends and the people who had listened to her since she was a baby or heard about her and had gone to school with her and all of that. So we were able to cope very well in the first few months, because we were so single-minded in our focus on just kind of keeping going and helping her bereaved husband keep going and doing everything that we could to support him in now raising this 7-month-old baby on his own. Shock was the best thing that could have happened to us, and it's why I was able to go back to work just 1 month later, I think, is because I knew there was a job to do. And you just put your head down and kind of take it one day at a time.
And you mentioned that it was your husband who got the call. How has the whole thing affected him?
He and I have been affected on completely different levels, I think. And I tend to, kind of focus on myself because, that's all each of us can do. And that's kind of the way that I'm wired anyway, I guess, being a performer and all of that. Rob gets hit by the sadness. I think in with more frequency and with more depth than I do, because I'm still in a place where this isn't really happening, and I can kind of distance myself from it having happened. He tends to feel more melancholy, and he's struck by sadness at times that surprised me too. He had Lauren as a single, like not a single dad, but a stay-at-home dad. They were extremely close, because I was off to work in the morning after I'd done my 3 months at home. I was off to work before the sun came up. He was getting her ready for school, braiding her hair, making her lunch. And they had a very, very close father-daughter relationship. And Lauren even remarked on this in a school project, that it was much different than most parental relationships. So he lost his little girl, and I lost a fellow mom, a very good friend, and somebody. She and I were getting much closer as she aged, because now she was a broadcaster, and we had so much more in common. So I think Rob mourns the little girl that he lost with great frequency and depth. And I honestly don't think he has the same mental, and I won't say tools, but the magic wand that I've been able to kind of breeze over myself, so that I'm able to kind of step through this and live through it every day. I think in many ways he feels it on a different level, and perhaps even more deeply and more real, with more reality than I do.
How about your daughter's husband? He faced this whole new life now, where he's a single father, and his wife is no longer alive. How is he coping with the whole situation?
Phil did an amazing job, and he's a very quiet man. He also has been interested in broadcasting from a producing and hosting place, so he's got that love of radio. But he's always had about 3 or 4 different jobs. So he's a very hardworking man, and I think his whole way of life has been to provide and to get the job done and do whatever's necessary, so that everything can continue around him. And no more were those skills needed than in that immediate aftermath. He sought comfort and friendship with someone that he had worked with in the past, and who knew Lauren just only to see her once in a while. And that friendship grew from that. And I can tell you that the two of them married this past summer, and she's a lovely young woman, and is now just a little bit older than Lauren was when she died. But Brooke has stepped in to become Colin's mom from, I think, basically before Colin even turned a year old. So she was there to help Phil, but also to provide a much-needed female presence in Colin's life. And as surprised as we were to learn about her very early on, we immediately knew that whatever was best for Phil was best for baby Colin, and that would always be the most important thing. So it's all come together in a way that I think Lauren, if she has a hand in this, has orchestrated very nicely.
And it's not easy to be a widower's partner either, because you have that legacy of their spouse to deal with, and so it sounds like she's a very giving person, because I think someone who's perhaps more selfish would find it harder to tolerate that kind of situation where, it was not a divorce. He lost her, and he was still in love with her.
Oh, very much. They'd only been married not even a year. They hadn't been married 2 years when Lauren died. So indeed, Brooke was stepping in at the time when Phil's love for Lauren was at its full bloom. And how do you even begin to deal with someone's shadow like that? But Brooke had lost her own father a very few years earlier than that, and was dealing with her own kind of grief. So that was their immediate common ground, was that grief. And so it really did bring them together in their brokenness.
And there are no perfect lives, but I would assume that, like anyone else, you've experienced hardships in your life before this incident. But does the pain you experience from any other form of adversity compare to the pain you felt when you lost your daughter? Can you ever completely heal from that?
Yeah, I had lost my mom at the age of 79, a few years earlier, and of course grandparents and such. But the comparison is, there is no comparison, Morgan, because it's because of the way that life is supposed to unfold, right? We know that our parents are going to die before we do. We certainly know that our grandparents are. We know that our beloved pets are one day going to hopefully, be in an urn or be laid to rest comfortably. You never, ever expect that you are going to outlive your child. And that's why, this situation is just absolutely, it's a sin against the universe because none of it makes any sense.
And being a public figure and having announced Lauren's passing publicly, did you ever speak with other mothers who had lost their children? And if so, did that help you at all?
Yes, absolutely. I spoke with other bereaved moms almost immediately. People reached out to me through email and my website right away, and said, I'm in this awful club, and people refer to it as a club, and they said, if you ever want to talk, or here's what happened to me. I found people telling me the most horrific stories, whether it had been their child who was murdered, or another who died by suicide, and still another who was Lauren's age and died when he was in university. These stories have all made it into the book because I feel that it's important to share that, it's not only my grief, but there are all kinds of bereavements for a parent. And while I believe that one of the worst things you can do is compare grief or use the words at least, I know that when it comes to pain and bereavement, we could have had it much, much worse. I do not lose perspective of that ever.
And when you reached the end of the book, and by the way, so did you write it yourself, or was it ghostwritten, as they say?
No, it was totally written by myself and with the great help of my husband.
And how did you feel when you got to the end of it? Because you mentioned earlier that it wasn't cathartic in the sense of having a release, or was it? Like when you got to the end, did you feel like a weight was lifted from your shoulders?
It's funny, I love the writer Dorothy Parker, and she has a quote that says, "I hate writing, I love having written." And I don't think that could be any more apt for the book. Now, I didn't realize that, once you've got the book written, of course, you send it into the publisher, and there are many, many, many levels of editing, and HarperCollins has been so fantastic because although I have written for decades, and my journal has been up for over 15 years now, and I write it every single day at erindavis.com. I certainly had never considered writing a book until they approached me and said, "You've got a book in you." And I went, "Yeah, I think I do." So in that regard, we might have felt like it was over, but I guess it would be comparable to giving birth to triplets naturally. You've got the one, and then they go, "Wait, there's another one," and then, here comes another one. Because there were just more and more and more stages to the process. I will tell you that even as of early December, we were finishing passages that needed clarification one more time from one more proofreader who was checking details on things. So we gave them the very cleanest and the best copy that we could, and then we were getting notes like, "Hey, why not switch this chapter here, put that one there?" And it all made so much sense. So when it was done, we kind of thought we were done, but no, there was a lot more still to come.
Well, wait, there's going to be another part of the process, because one day you're going to be in a bookstore and you'll see it there and you'll think, my personal story is on this shelf with all these other books. So I wonder how that's going to feel for you.
Well, you know what, Morgan, I'm a big believer in intention things, and for the last 6 months or a year, every time my husband and I walk through an airport or walk past a Chapters Indigo, I'll say, "My book's going to be there." And so it's just kind of like, the reward. I don't know. That's not the right word. It's sort of the justification, the finished product sitting there And I want for the world or Canada or whomever chooses to read it, I want them to share in this, because the great overwhelming message in it is that you can do this, that you can survive anything, and here's how we did it, and here are some steps to deal with grief, and some of the things that we helped or we found helped us a lot, and things that you can say to people who are grieving and what not to say. So there's a whole bunch in it there that's so much more than just our story. It's a contribution from so many other people who have helped to hopefully make Mourning Has Broken a well-rounded story of hope.
And do you feel sense of closure now that the book is just a few weeks away from hitting the bookstores?
Yes, and you know, at the risk of sounding trite, another chapter is about to be written, because this is now with the book tour that begins, and I plan to do a whole lot of public speaking. I've always loved doing that in my previous life, and continuing since the time that I left radio. But now I'm going to be able to hopefully impart this message personally to people who really feel like they want to hear it. I've heard from people who've bought tickets to some of the appearances saying, you know, I'm bringing my friend, she just lost her son, or, you know, I really need to hear this message and hear how you're getting through it. I don't look to be any great prophet or you know, someone who is an expert on anything. All I can do is just continue to live my life openly, as I did through my whole career and through Lauren's life, and just show that it can be done. It really, truly can be, with the right help and support.
Sure. And now we're going to a break, and we'll be back with This Crazy World, How Aberrant Behavior Shapes the Society We Live in. This show has been brought to you by Voices for Ability Radio. Voices for Ability is Canada's first internet-based radio station dedicated to individuals with disabilities, their caregivers, and allies. They are a source both entertaining and informative that focuses on issues faced by individuals with disabilities on a daily basis. All of their talk shows are produced and presented by individuals with disabilities and highlight the people, organizations, and resources that make a difference in the daily lives of individuals with disabilities. Join them for conversations about employment, relationships, advocacy, and accessibility, among other things, at www.v4aradio.com. And so it's been 30 years since you started at CHFI, and the media landscape has changed dramatically since then. 24-hour news stations abound. There's the internet and social media, podcasts. The world is oversaturated with media now. Where do you stand on the current state of the media now that there's just so much out there?
Oh, that is a good question. And you know, Morgan, ever since I began in radio, and probably since, you know, people like Barbara Frum, who was my very early idol, began in radio 30 years before that, people have been saying, oh, radio is done. You know, back in the 20s, it was because there was film, and then there was television, and then there were CDs in the cars. Nobody needed to listen to radio anymore in their cars. And then, of course, satellite and all of that. I think, without being able to speak to all of the different other platforms that are available at the touch of a button out there, or the command of whatever is playing music in your house, I think that the real connection will always be needed. Not just someone telling you that it's cloudy and 13 today, but that your world is okay, as my mentor Valerie Geller says, you know, is my world safe? Waking people up in the morning when they are at their most vulnerable, both naked, both figuratively and literally, and being there for them. And that has been, fortunately, my very lucky connection with people, is that people have felt that they know me, and I've wanted to get to know them, and we've communicated, you know, through my website, through email, Twitter, Instagram, every single platform out there. I want to be in touch with people and to keep that connection. So that personal connection will always, always, always matter. It's up to radio to deliver it, and I fear that connection may be being lost from the corporate end of things.
Yeah, that is possible. And then one other way in which radio has changed, at least a certain kind of radio anyway, Much of the talk-oriented radio these days is either dominated by right-wing political discourse, or there's the Howard Stern disciples in the so-called morning zoo type radio. Do you feel the quality of terrestrial radio to some extent has fallen by the wayside?
I think that the market will support whatever people want, and I was not a fan of Howard Stern in the beginning for many reasons, mostly just because I didn't get the kind of humor and body parts and sex and all that kind of stuff. But that's because, but you know what? There was a market for that, and you can't argue with success. And I thought when he went to satellite, well, nobody's gonna tune in now that he can say tits. But but they did. They followed him, and it's because he is a genuine communicator. And for all of his frat humor and stuff that has just built him an amazing empire, at the heart of it, he has been open and vulnerable and human. And I think that it is that connection again. So whatever, I think that if what I think is garbage, and I'm not saying that that's Howard Stern, I'm changing lanes here, but if what I think is not quality broadcasting succeeds, then somebody's doing something right. There's lots of room for different flavors.
And what gives you the most pride as you reflect on all your years in radio? And by the way, how many years were you on the radio?
I was employed in radio at 17, so I can tell you we would be coming up on 40 years. But what gives me the most pride? I think that I can look back on it and say, hopefully, that I was able to make a connection with people and that they felt better for having shared some time with us on the radio, and that I with my partners and my radio stations through the years was able to bring some joy or some laughter or some happiness or some fulfillment in some tiny way to people's lives. That is my greatest source of joy, and also the fulfillment that I feel from still having a connection with so many of these people today.
Yes, well, that show was very much an institution. I mean, I just remember having a vague feeling like that show is not going anywhere. This is very much also a Toronto experience in radio as well.
Yeah, I was so lucky, Morgan. I mean, to be able to do it from 1988 until 2003, when they had another morning show that was losing their station because they were pulling the plug on it, and thought, well, move them over to CHFI and let's see what happens. And then being asked back in 2005. So that was extremely gratifying to kind of have the rug pulled out from under you and then be invited back and have them say, well, yeah, please come home to a place I always knew was home. So, it was a wonderful experience, and to be able to leave when I wanted to leave, when this is a job where so many people are kind of shown the door when they hit, 40 or 50 or whatever, or a certain pay grade. It was all I could have hoped for in a career, truly.
Well, I'm gratified that you chose to do your first interview with me for this book. Thank you very much. And I want to repeat the title of the book for those who are listening. It is Mourning Has Broken, Love, Loss, and Reclaiming Joy. And I am aware it's available for pre-order on Amazon right now. So what other options do they have for pre-ordering it and also purchasing it in February?
Oh, well, that we're going to find out, because remember, I'm new at this. So, Amazon for pre-order, and it'll be available in bookstores after February 26th or on that day. And Rob and I are working on an audio book version of it because, who better to voice my book than myself? And Rob is a producer, so he keeps me in line, which is wonderful. At least on the radio, anyway. So those are the options right now, Morgan, and who knows? I've learned never to close the door on possibility, because there's always going to be something. And I'll tell you, this may sound like it's just my antidepressants working, but I wake up every morning and the first thing I say is, what amazing thing is going to happen today? And sometimes it's just Rob bringing me a cappuccino, and Sometimes it's finding out that a venue is sold out that I'm going to be speaking at, but I've learned never to close the door on possibility.
And that's pretty amazing considering, after to have that kind of tragedy happen and then to find yourself at this point. So you've come to a point now where you've found some inner peace?
Definitely, because there's just nothing that's going to bring her back, and all that we can do is embrace the positive changes that have happened for Phil and for Colin, and the ties that Brooke and I are forging, and with Rob as well. And we're just we truly are making the best of everything that has happened, and it's exactly what Lauren would want us to do. It's just as now, don't laugh, but I spoke to a psychic very shortly after Lauren passed, and Lauren's message was, "Mom, this isn't about you, it's about them." And she meant the listeners who would become readers, and just finding a message in all of this, and trying to help other people through our own experiences.
No, I'm not laughing. My mother and I are both psychics, so no judgment here. So
what?
I'm serious. Yeah.
Oh, we'll have to talk.
Yeah, for sure. And our listeners should keep their eyes and ears open, particularly if they live in Toronto, because you're doing a full-fledged book tour. Am I correct?
Yes, sir, I am. It starts around the 23rd or 4th of February, and it's going to include Toronto, areas around Toronto, and Ottawa, and then we'll be moving it west. But from what I understand, how publishing works, they give you this short blast of a media tour, and then you're on your own, and that's okay, because I still come back to do publishing and stuff. So I'm hoping, and I'll be publishing it all or posting it all through my website, to be able to come back and speak at various events in different places as this journey quite literally continues.
Will you be speaking at CHFI?
Well, that's a good question. There are a couple of different ideas that are being floated right now. I'm not sure about the morning show, but there's something else that may be in the works, and I'm not trying to be coy. It just hasn't been nailed down yet. So I would love to go back to, sort of my home and share the next chapter there too.
And finally, did you get your fill of Phil Collins music at CHFI? Are you ready to be done with that once and for all?
Well, you mean because my son-in-law's name is Phil and the baby's name is Colin?
Yeah, it's an interesting coincidence.
Geez. It really, truly is, and they didn't do it for that reason.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it just turned out to be quite a coincidence that a core AC artist would end up being two names that are so prominent in our lives too. But yeah, I miss we didn't get to listen to the music that much because we always had our headphones turned down and we were planning what the next break was going to be, and that's how I survived a bunch of Christmas music.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Erin. I really appreciate this.
Morgan, I appreciate your informed and compassionate questions. I really do, and now you've spoiled me because I'm going to hope that all of the interviews are this good. Good luck with your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much.